Hello everyone and welcome. In today's video, I'm going to be working on this 1/25th scale 1978 Trans Am and updating you all on the status of this project. As you may recall, I first introduced this project a few weeks back. It's using a cool looking pre-painted model kit from AMT, but really the biggest focus of this build is the leaf spring rear suspension. This is my first time building a small scale car like this that uses a leaf spring suspension, so this has definitely been a learning experience. As talked about in the last video, it has its advantages but also some disadvantages. It was also a bit of a challenge to choose the correct material and dial in the design, but the results were looking promising. Today I'm continuing the build by installing some new leaves in the rear and getting the front suspension assembled and installed. I'll also be talking a bit about what's next for this project. I've created a playlist for this build which I've linked below in the description if you'd like to check out the previous video featuring this project. But let's dive back into this build and make this Trans Am a roller. I started out by installing some new leaves that I thought might work a little better than the ones on the car currently. I've been continuing to play around with different designs and thicknesses, and it's sort of been an ongoing process of experimenting. Like I discussed in the previous video, these 3D printed PLA leaf springs work very well, but with the weight of the car on them, they will start to sag over time and lose their springiness, if that makes sense. I've already discussed some ways that we can mitigate this and some potential solutions to this issue as well, so I'm not really concerned about that being an issue. I'm sure with more builds, driving, and experimenting, we'll figure things out and work to refine the design the best we can, as we do with other parts. One thing I definitely do like is the scale look of these leaf springs. Yeah, they definitely hang a little low, which is sort of unavoidable, but it's so cool for how scale it is to have leaf springs on a car this small. As expected, these new leaves work a little better than the previous, and with some weight in the rear, the ride height is about where it needs to be. More work is still needed though, as the mounts are further away from each other on one side than the other, since I just eyeballed the installation, and that is causing one side of the suspension to work better than the other. While I'm working on repositioning those mounts, I'll use that as an opportunity to do a little repair work on the chassis and also paint it. It's looking a little rough at the moment for sure, since right now I'm just focused on hacking it up and making everything fit and getting it to work, but soon I'll be spending some time hopefully making it look a little more presentable. Although with that said, I do intend for this car to be much more of a driver than a shelf queen, and I may even be doing some stunt driving with this car, so no point in making it too cosmetically perfect. Although as of now, the rear still needs a little work, which I may do most of that off camera, I'd say that as far as a proof of concept, it's done its job. It's pretty much exactly what I wanted. Now it's just a matter of experimenting and refining things a bit. Let's go ahead and move on to the front end. I put together a 57mm width FC01 front suspension and steering assembly. I've covered this assembly a lot recently in both some standalone videos as well as used it for a few projects. If you're interested in learning more about it, I'll include a link to an overview video I made in the description, but it is fully FDM 3D printable and you'll find the STL files over on our Patreon page if you'd like to make one yourself. Now the frame piece I'm using is designed to fit one of our FFR SC1 chassis, but I decided to use it for this project as I thought it would make a nice way to secure this assembly to the chassis without any custom design work or anything other than hacking away at the chassis being necessary. So with that FC01 assembly fully built, it's time to secure it to the chassis. Now originally, I thought I'd just chop off the entire front end of the chassis and secure this assembly in its place just like I did with the Shelby GT350 project. But I decided to try and just chop away at it bit by bit and keep more of it intact, and it turned out that it worked. I was able to maintain much more of the model kit's chassis piece, which means that the inner fenders and front section remain intact. A bit of a hack job for sure, but it still turned out looking pretty good, all things considered. At this point, as the car is starting to come together, I couldn't resist getting those wheels painted, so that's what I did next. I love the look of these wheels on this car. They were just a set that I happened to have lying around, but I ended up really liking the look of them. It's kind of an old school design that I wanted to paint to look like aluminum. I'm pretty sure that we posted the STL files for these wheels on a Patreon a while back, but for the sake of convenience, I'll go ahead and post the STL files for these wheels right below this video if you're watching this on Patreon. Just a quick spray with some Rust-Oleum metallic aluminum paint was all it took to really make these wheels look good. While they dried, I went ahead and installed some front springs. And there you go. Again, I love the look of these wheels on this car, and the paint makes them look 1,000 times better. As the car is really starting to take shape, I decided to go ahead and glue the front bumper on. This car is already looking pretty sick, and I'm glad to see that there's plenty of room under the hood. In fact, speaking of under the hood, my plan is to install a brushless motor in this car. My plan for this car is to be a stunt car that we'll be using for various stunts, chases, jumps, and other shenanigans. We had a blast a couple weeks ago doing those jumps with the General Lee, so we're wanting to do a lot more stuff like that in the future. Now, of course, normally with a highly detailed build like this, I'd install smaller electronics that will propel the car to slower, more scale-accurate speeds. But to jump, drift, and slide around every corner like in a movie, it takes a lot of power and speed, which we can film at a higher frame rate, then slow it down to make it look more real. It certainly will be interesting to see how well these tiny, super scale drivetrain and suspension parts handle the brushless power, high speeds, jumps, and dirt roads. I'm expecting some carnage, but I guess you don't know till you try. Definitely stay tuned for that. So as I show a few shots of this car, you may have noticed that air cleaner sticking out through the hood. The previous owner of this kit got a little sloppy with the glue on this stock scoop, so I think I'm going to use something different. Most likely at this stage, I think I'm just going to go full race car and have a tall air cleaner sticking out similar to what you see here. Obviously, still a few more things to do before this car will be ready to drive, but this is where I'm going to end today's video. Patrons, be on the lookout for the STL files for this leaf spring rear suspension, probably being dropped within the next couple weeks. We'll put together a little set with some files, info, and probably a video to go along with it as well. I look forward to seeing what you all build. There's lots more cool stuff on the way, but until then, thanks everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.